Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.
State unemployment benefits could be reined in. Senate Republican leaders just say no to federal health care programs, and there's some quiet talk of a big tax reform effort. Hello, I'm Kelly McCullen. House and Senate Republican leaders began rolling out their 2013 legislative agendas this week. The House GOP is outlining a broad vision and hope for record-setting legislative speed to complete their work. House Republicans say some version of tax reform, education reform, and business regulatory reform top their 2013 agenda. House Speaker Tom Tillis says the budget problems of 2 years ago have been stabilized.
We've got to worry about the budget, but we don't have to worry near as much about the budget as we did 2 years ago when we had a structural deficit approaching $3 billion. We may even have a slight surplus.
The House GOP was asked about many issues, but it appears their focus is on the economy over social issues.
You see these? It says jobs in the economy. When you think about doing something other than improving jobs in the economy, you snap it until the urge to do something else passes. That's what we're focusing. That's where we can have the most impact.
Speaker Tillis acknowledged interest in reforming public schools, but he says it might be time to lift bureaucratic burdens from traditional public school campuses.
What does that look like? And that really came out of a discussion I've had with some superintendents who are considering applying for charters. And I asked them why, and they said so that we can have the flexibility and do some innovative things that are more difficult to do in traditional K-12 education.
Eddie Goodall is the executive director of the North Carolina Public Charter Schools Association. Speaker Tillis says let's make traditional more like charters. How do you read that?
Well, it's interesting because as an executive director of a charter schools association, we've got to be careful not to overreact to that, because one of the purposes of the charter school law is to create innovation and excellence and translate that into the rest of the public schools so that the tide rises for all.
House Democrats have not called a press conference to outline an agenda, but with a 34-vote deficit, tactics might be different this session.
I think everybody's mission at this juncture is to move the state forward. We would admit as Democrats that we have moved the state forward, and I guess part of our job would be not to retrogress to any great extent.
The first thing is to make sure we put our vision out first. We're going to be ahead. We're going to let the public know here's what the options are, here's what can be done, and then help let them judge what the priorities really are.
House bills and House committees began rolling out this week with a full schedule of work schedule beginning next week. Representative Mike Hager is the House Majority Whip, and in political terms, that means you count votes.
That's right.
Republicans. Yeah. You've seen the agenda out there. The issues are there. What's going to define the House in 2013?
Well, I will tell you, I'll count Democrat votes if they vote our way. So let's go ahead and say not just Republicans. So I think in 2013, we've got a unique opportunity in the legislature. We have a Republican governor. We have a Republican House, Republican Senate, but of course I'm concentrating on the House. And I think what we'll see is conservative issues coming out. Tax reform, we'll probably look at education reform, we'll look at some energy issues, UI, unemployment insurance reform, some of those things.
All right, people understand implicitly when you say let's get rid of the state income taxes and let's replace it with a sales tax or some other such thing. The Senate seems to be farther along this process. The House seems to be holding this idea closer to the vest. Right. Are you letting them get out there and see how it goes publicly before you weigh in?
Well, at the end of the day, when we first started, it was Senator Rucho's idea, so he drove that issue. So I think at the end of the day, we're going to see what comes over from the Senate. We're going to look at what's there. The devil's in the details with that. What do you do on land transfer? How do you tax services? How do you do those things? But I think philosophically we look at it, and I always ask the question of my colleagues, philosophically, do you want to tax wealth creation? Do you want to have an income tax? And if the answer is no, then that puts you at the starting gate. Now, all the other details have to flow. Now, we have to look at that and look at how it affects the business economy in North Carolina, how it affects the environment, how it affects our constituents, and all those little details. So we're not ready to say, yes, we're full board on that, but it seems to be a good idea.
Well, you're in the conversation when you talk about revenue generation, whether we go off the income tax or keep it and broaden it and all this. Is it about keeping revenue neutral so that no money is earned by the state, but it doesn't lose any funding from current levels? Or are you looking at just slowly diminishing the amount of money the state takes out of the system?
Well, I think, you look at the past 2 or 3 decades, and anybody would agree, especially me as being the conservative and majority whip, that we probably have been spending too much money. I think at the end of the day, I personally, and I can't speak for the rest of my colleagues in the House, would like to see some tax reform, not penalize wealth creation, and see a reduction in overall expenditures from the state.
Is it better from a conservative standpoint to err on the side of cutting too much, then come back and restore funding, or do you play it cautious on the cutting side at this point and gradually winnow it down to where you think or where you expect agencies and bureaucracies to operate?
Well, being the previous session, the only engineer on the House floor, I think we get it right the first time. I'd love to take a stab at it and say we think this is very close. That margin of error has to be very small. And answer is, not too big, not too small, but as close to just right as we can get it.
How close are we right now as a state to just right state government?
Well, right now we're looking at, kind of breaking even on not having a deficit this year, but not having a surplus. And I don't think we know the answer to what you just said until we delve down some of the processes that state government has. How many people do we need? Are all the regulations about right? So there's a lot of details we've got to work out. So I'm not sure anybody can answer that question. Anybody can make a stab at it, but not an educated stab.
Well, speaking of education, public education, Speaker Tillis came out earlier this week and said, hey, we want the traditional, as they call it, traditional public schools to act more like charters, maybe give them flexibility. Another school of thought is you give charters more money than ever to help them build their own school buildings, which would be directly competitive. What's the House view?
I think, and again, just speaking from my view, I think we give local LEAs local control. We give them more control of how they do their business. For instance, when there are holidays, when do they start, when they finish, what they do with their budget money, how they hire and fire teachers. Give them local control, because a school that's run in Mecklenburg County is not going to be run the same as it is in Rutherford County, because we have total different geography, total different demographics. So we give them the flexibility to kind of mold the school for the geography and the demographics and the culture they're in. So that will actually, I think, reduce the dollars that we have there, which is basically what we've done with charter schools. We've given them the flexibility to operate within the constraints of their area. We want to do that for LEAs also.
Now, this is Representative Mike Hager, House Majority Whip here in North Carolina. Thank you, sir, for being on the show.
Thank you.
House Republicans are making an early push to reform North Carolina's unemployment benefits system. Our state's facing a multi-billion-dollar loan debt to the federal government. The GOP is hoping to repay that debt early with temporary unemployment tax hikes and some sacrifices from unemployed workers. The House Finance Committee quickly approved legislation to reform North Carolina's unemployment benefits program. That includes new caps on the size of unemployment checks and caps on the length of time a person could receive unemployment.
The focus of the bill is to put people back to work. It's a reemployment bill, and the sooner that we can have the debt resolved and have our SUDA fund soften again, then we're going to be able to do that.
The state borrowed $2.5 billion from the federal government to pay unemployment benefits during the Great Recession, and that money must be repaid. Here's how House Bill 4 would do it. It would temporarily raise unemployment taxes on affected businesses, and for recipients, the maximum weekly unemployment check could drop from $535 to $350. Future unemployment recipients would receive benefits for 20 weeks instead of a maximum 26 weeks.
You break it down to $350 and then you add all the variables in. You're talking about a family living on $250, probably $200 a week, and I don't think that that's fair.
House Bill 4 also redefines the term suitable work. That means an unemployment recipient must accept a job if it pays 120% more than their weekly unemployment check after 10 weeks of receiving benefits.
We are changing the focus from just getting those unemployment checks out to putting people back into job training, retraining, and matching folks with available jobs.
Bill critics concede the state's unemployment trust fund needs bolstering and the state's debt to the feds should be repaid. But they say those are temporary challenges for which House Bill 4 promises structural changes.
It also makes those changes permanent. So once the debt's paid, once the trust fund is solvent, once all the taxes have gone away because on employers, these cuts will remain permanent in the bill.
The bill heads to the full House floor early next week. Senate Republican plans for 2013 sound much like the House and what you've heard from Governor Pat McCrory. While the broad themes do seem similar, there are some real differences in the details and in legislative priorities. Senate Republican leaders are making it clear early in the session that North Carolina income tax reform is a top issue.
It is important for us in terms of our competitive posture with other states. It's important for us in terms of making sure that there's a fair allocation of the cost of government across the spectrum of economic activity in North Carolina. It's important for us because the current outline of our tax system is based on a model that doesn't exist anymore in North Carolina.
Tax reform can mean many things, including the elimination or reduction of personal and corporate income tax rates in favor of expanding and raising the state's sales tax rate and possibly taxing real estate transactions. Nothing is set in stone. We'll see what's in the legislation when it appears. Senate leaders say they'll be focusing on more public education reforms as well. The target could be tenure for senior teachers and stronger funding for charter schools.
The goal, obviously, is to make sure that our kids have every opportunity to succeed in their educational environment, but also in life. And right now, our public education system is failing too many of our students, and we need significant improvement there.
Senate Democrats agree that public education reform is needed, but they want to focus on modernization.
Education has really too long been the model that was implemented in the early 20th century, where it's one teacher in front of a classroom, sort of an industrial standardized model, and we need to individualize education.
Some Republican leaders expect a fast-paced legislative session, and that includes all the various reform proposals that are on the table, but none is bigger than state tax reform. Economic groups are out there releasing reports defending many tax reform plans. Civitas Institute says scrap all state income taxes in favor of a sales tax and a business tax. The North Carolina Budget and Tax Center is recommending the addition of tax brackets to the existing tax structure for married couples earning over $200,000 a year. Over the John Locke Foundation, that team is on the record in support of what's called the USA tax, where money is taxed as people spend it and all personal savings are tax-free while dropping the income tax. But for all the talk, there's one senator who is the point person on any potential tax reform bill. Senator Bob Rucho is, would you say, tackling income tax reform proposals in North Carolina. The House has certainly deferred to you. Where are we right now? Step one. Who are you listening to? A lot of theories out there.
Well, what we're doing, and you know, the original point was we've studied it for the last 6 to 8 months, trying to determine what is the problem. And we've studied it to the point when you recognize that we've seen a significant reduction over the last 10 years of income. That means people's paychecks. You've also seen an increase in poverty. What you've also seen is an eroding sales tax base, which we've been plagued with since the 70s. And now what we have is we're the 5th highest unemployment rate in the country, none of which are attractive for and offer you any opportunity for what our goal is, economic growth and jobs.
The fact of the matter is the current state tax structure, Democrats and Republicans say, was founded in the Great Depression. Exactly. Now you're saying the Great Recession hits, and the method that got us through the Depression is not getting us through the recession. How can that be when everybody compares a recession with the Depression?
Well, you think about it. When we started this in 1930s, and you know, there's been very limited changes, it was based on a manufacturing-based economy. We've gone to service industry, you know, and the whole, not just North Carolina, but the entire country. And in that situation, the way our economy is, we're not competitive, because we don't meet the needs of a global economy, and then our tax policy no longer is able to achieve a revenue stream that's stable, that actually increases with the growth of business and activity. And that means that you have $2 billion surpluses and $2 billion budget deficits. Hard way to operate any type of organization.
The easy label on what could be done in North Carolina under your watch is the elimination of state personal and corporate income taxes. People hear that, they get that right away. Is that the plan? And if so, how does the state make money? Because we need some money to do the schools, the roads, and all the things we like to have.
Our goal is revenue neutral. If we have so many dollars in now on the budget, we're going to have it at the end. That's the effort. But to accomplish that, we have an eroding sales tax base. Now you think about it, since 1970s, what we've had is a complete shift. For example, When people, 1/3 of everybody's disposable income back then was services. Today, it's 2/3 of their income. So in reality, it's been a huge shift into service, and that means that there is no tax revenue.
Now, let's dumb this down. If I go to the store and buy a pair of blue jeans, I pay a sales tax on it.
Yes.
If I hire a plumber and he snakes my drain, I'm not taxed on the service that he supplied. You want to tax those services?
Well, what we're trying to do is broaden the base. And the only way to do so is to include services because it's become such a large part of our economy. And to avoid it means that government just punishes the sale of tangible goods, things, rather than the services. And as I said to you, 2/3 of all the disposable spending occurs on services. So you basically are rewarding the people that do services at the expense of the people that produce goods, a bad situation.
But people down here hire lobbyists and they provide services and they're powerful. And how do you work that in? How do you get them at the table to buy in? Because I would think they would have some say behind the scenes.
We have spent hours and hours trying to share this information, identifying that there is indeed a problem that needs to be addressed. There have been 7 other groups that have made this effort, either through the governor and legislator. Each of them have failed. And bottom line is simple. We've kicked the can down the road as far, we've run out of road because you see the unemployment rate that we're presently 5th highest in the country. This isn't going to change significantly unless we change the underpinning of our economy, make ourselves more competitive. And in doing so, it requires a fundamental change, and the fundamental change would be a consumption-based retail sales and use tax. And then in exchange for that, because people will say you're just trying to take more money, we're going to zero out personal income tax and then ultimately corporate income tax.
Are you giving the State House any deference in this, or are they waiting to see what you do, then they will react? Because it's got to go through both chambers.
And the governor.
Well, and the governor, yes.
Yeah, so, but under the circumstances, we've been working in a tax group, working with House and Senate members, trying to get some ideas. And we're waiting for the House to take a look and come forward with some ideas. No one owns the perfect idea. You know, taxes, everybody hates taxes, but there are good taxes versus bad taxes. Good taxes are a consumption tax because it produces business activity, income, and growth. Bad taxes are income taxes because it taxes production and is detrimental to economic growth. So it's only logical to say get rid of the ones that are onerous and keep the ones that are good and build on that. And that's the effort that we're trying to make.
Bottom line, if you're a working person in this state, say middle class, lower middle class, you take away the income tax on me, but raise my sales taxes. Are we paying more taxes as a working class?
I will say to you, it will be, for those individuals that have not received tax preferences, will be pretty much a wash. Actually, they may actually have more money in the big scheme.
Appreciated, Senator Rucho.
Yes, thank you.
The Senate is still talking about tax reform, but it's taking tangible action on 2 provisions of the Affordable Care Act, or what some people call Obamacare. The state has 2 choices upcoming: expand the Medicaid program under this new federal health care law, as well as decide if state officials will be managing a state-run health insurance exchange. For Senate Republicans, the issue of the federal health care reform law is one of deep skepticism. Senate GOP leaders say the promises made by the U.S. Congress to help states expand their Medicaid programs and operate health insurance exchanges cannot be taken at face value.
You know, you never know what's going to happen with the federal government. They're with you one day and the next day they pull out and leave you holding the bill. So, you know, that's what our fear is. If they want to do it, let them do it.
Federal law allows the federal government to operate a health insurance exchange for North Carolina customers. Federal law also grants states an option to expand Medicaid services. Democrats say the government-run health care program should be expanded.
We should be expanding Medicaid. It will provide coverage to 500,000 people, 95% of which do not have coverage today. It would be very short-sighted not to do so. It won't cost the state anything for the first 3 years, and after then, at most, we'll pay only 10%.
But Republican leaders say they'll not take a chance on federal promises to pay all of Medicaid for 3 years and most of Medicaid afterward.
What's going to happen the 4th, 5th, and 6th year? Or if they change their mind the first 3 or 4 years? You know, gone down this road with them before and been sadly disappointed.
I think certainly it's a matter of states, not just North Carolina, but all 50 states, making certain that in terms of this commitment, it becomes a permanent, long-term commitment, which is something that we can all believe in, stand behind.
The House made its own moves in legislation against federal health care laws in the 2011-2012 session. Governor McCrory's team has raised some questions about what to do with these health insurance exchanges and Medicaid, but it's the Senate that has placed a bill on the table. Legislative leaders and Governor McCrory are seizing on the results of a new state audit of the Medicaid program in North Carolina. This audit is revealing that the Medicaid program is spending more money on bureaucracy or administration than other states and cannot produce documentation on how much it's paying its contractors. Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger released a written statement. He said, "I applaud Auditor Beth Wood and her staff for their tireless work in uncovering gross budgetary mismanagement and efficiencies within our state's Medicaid program." State Auditor Beth Wood joins us now to discuss this Medicaid audit. Pat McCrory's office releases a press release. House Speaker Tillis is out there. I'm hearing the words mismanagement, inefficiency. Are those words you would use to describe the Medicaid audit that you conducted or the results of it?
I would have to agree with those. Those are the conclusions of the audit. When you look at the Department administration being directed by the General Assembly to produce savings, to go out and achieve savings, and they were sort of given the roadmap to do it, and they made cognizant decisions not to be in compliance with state statute. And then you look at the administrative costs. The state of North Carolina spends about $751 million to administer $10 billion as 6.4% of the total. And then you look at other states like Massachusetts who are administering $13 billion and they're only at a little over 4%. So again, you've got a lot of issues, and they're really, information's not there to determine why some and all of this is going on.
All right, let's look back at the Medicaid program. People who give to charities, who pay attention, if a charity says it gives away almost 94% of what you donate to it directly into the service, that sounds like a very successful rate. This is being pitched as a failing rate compared against the states you've compared us against. North Carolina against, what, 8 other states. So 94% going to services is not getting the job done.
Well, not when you look at, we compared the state of North Carolina to 9 other states, and states that spend about the same thing, if not more, than the state of North Carolina. And their administrative cost in most situations, 8 out of the 9, were lower than ours. And so again, you step back and you say for every dollar that we're spending on administration, it's not going into the direct benefits of the program. And then you step back and look at other things that we found in the audit, and that was that we've got higher administrative cost. In the Department of or the Division of Medical Assistance, they are contracting out about half of their administrative services.
So they hire vendors out there, the state contractors as they're called,
to administer the services. And then when we stepped back and we said, okay, let's see a list of those contracts, and then let's see how much you spent. They didn't even have a list of the contracts, and they could not tie fiscal year expenditures to each of those contracts. And so when we started looking at this, we came to the conclusion that they are hiring out these administrative services and they are not tracking and monitoring to see if they're getting what they paid for.
Is that a form of inefficiency that a bureaucracy can fall prey to by simply being a big old bureaucracy, or is that somebody doesn't know what they're doing in the Medicaid office?
It could be one of either. Bottom line is just best practices would tell you if you've got a contract and you've got a contracted price and you've got deliverables for that contract, that somebody would be monitoring to make sure that in any situation, whether it's for-profit or government, that you're getting what you paid for. And that's just common sense. Bureaucracy really shouldn't have anything to do with that.
Okay, Pat McCrory, the legislature, they've all dialed in on this to say this is how we're going to have to fix this, once again using the word fix. Is this something from your experience in state government that can be fixed in a couple of months in a legislative session, or should we look a year or two out to make structural changes in these programs? How does it work?
It's hard to say. Obviously, something as big as this Medicaid program As I said, there's $751 million in administrative cost incurred to administer our $10 billion. That money is spent over 10 divisions in the Department of Health and Human Services. Medicaid is only, Division of Medical Assistance is only one division. So now you've got these administrative costs over 10 other divisions. And so is the monitoring going on there? And are we duplicating services in these other divisions that the Division of Medical Assistance could be handling? So there's just a lot of things to look at here, $10 billion being a lot of money.
Next step's political work, then back to the state auditor if they want to assess how they do. Beth Wood, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
The full House approved an emergency funding bill to restore money for residents of mental health group homes. This legislation will allow existing state funds to be shifted so no new revenue is being collected. Some group home residents need daily living assistance and they had lost their federal eligibility, and state leaders say it was part of a snafu in a state bill. Well, this legislation corrects that. Nearly $40 million is coming to help these people.
Personal care services, you qualify for that based on your level of acuity in what are called ADLs, activities of daily living.
The bill needs Senate approval and Governor McCrory's signature. Well, when you're online this weekend, why not look us up? We'll be tweeting, we'll be Facebooking, and we'll answer your questions about what you've seen on this first edition of Legislative Week in Review in 2013. Our blog is open running. Visit unctv.org/legweek. We have some articles and videos posted there. And most importantly, it's great to be back with you here in 2013, and we'll see you next week.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.